I'm Dr. W.F. Strong. Welcome to Good Books Radio. I am your guide for good books, your guide for great literature and cutting-edge nonfiction. This is, as I said, Good Books Radio, and we have a great show for you today. My childhood hero was Thomas Edison, among others, but he was certainly one of the top. And he is also on the top of many other people's lists. I mean, Time Magazine and others who did a few years ago, the most influential people of the last 1,000 years have Edison in the top 15, sometimes the top 10. If you rank inventors of the last 100 years, he's often number one. Sometimes Einstein will eclipse him as the most important technological person, but generally Edison as an inventor is number one. As Joel Stein said, if whatever you're using at this moment that's technological in nature was probably invented by Edison, and whatever you were using a few minutes before was probably invented by Edison, and whatever you will be using will probably be influenced by patents that Edison created. So we are fortunate to have today, because our book today, as you can imagine, of course, is Edison, The Rise of Innovation. It's a new nonfiction work and is written by Leonard DeGraaf, who has a long, long history with Edison. Welcome, Mr. DeGraaf. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good, sir. How are you?
Now, tell us a little bit about your position. I think you must have the best job in the world.
Yes, lots of people tell me that. I'm an archivist at Thomas Edison National Historical Park, which is in West Orange, New Jersey, and the park includes Edison's West Orange laboratory and his estate, Glenmont, where Edison and his family lived for the last 45 years of his life. And my job here is to help take care of the park's huge archive of Edison documents, more than 5 million pages of material that provides almost complete record of Edison's work and Edison's inventions. It includes his laboratory notebooks and his correspondence, patents, all sorts of very interesting, important material. So that's kind of my day job.
And you're also the author of Historic Photos of Thomas Edison, published in 2008.
That's correct.
And you worked, you got a master's in history at Rutgers?
That's correct.
And you worked in the Edison papers at Rutgers, so how is their collection there different from the one that you are an archivist in now? Oh,
well, actually, the Rutgers project, the Thomas Edison Papers project, is an editorial project. They don't have a collection. They're actually publishing out of the archives in West Orange.
I see.
It's a partnership between Rutgers University and the National Park Service and a few other organizations, a long-term project to make Edison's papers accessible. I started my work with Edison, working with them, a long time ago, and once I got here, I was hooked because there's so many fascinating stories that this collection tells, and you never get bored. Every day you're learning something new. So that's kind of how I got started.
Well, it's not unlike it was in his day. He had people dropping by all the time, right?
Oh, yeah, these laboratories, yeah, they're very busy places, and these laboratories attracted people who wanted to come here to work for Edison because they wanted to learn. Edison was on the cutting edge of new technologies, and people knew that. So people would, particularly at Menlo Park and then later at West Orange, people would come here to meet with Edison. Sometimes people would have their own ideas for an invention that they wanted help with. So it's a busy place. Lots of newspaper reporters came here to interview Edison. So we know a lot about what was going on here from all these newspaper stories.
But wasn't he kind of annoyed with publicity?
Yeah, I had mixed feelings about that. He was savvy enough to understand that that publicity was a very important part of his work. He needed to maintain a certain image and a certain persona in the media. He understood how the media worked. So he was for the most part, very much willing and accommodating to reporters. But the downside of that was that it could be a distraction from allowing him to concentrate on his work.
Well, Leonard, I want to tell you, this is a beautiful book. I've told people already that they should get this book, and I say don't get it on your Kindle and don't get it on your iPad, because the book itself is a physical wonder. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous book, the way they used to make them. And, full of wonderful photographs and examples of his early work. One of the things that you cover in here, well, before I get to that, Bill Gates wrote a wonderful introduction. How did you get him to do that, the foreword?
Well, the publisher was fortunate enough to do that. I can't take credit for that. I think it was a natural fit when you think of Edison as, the kind of pioneering innovator. Bill Gates is of that caliber, and he was very nice enough to share his own views about Edison, how Edison influenced him, and also to remind us that the story that we tell is very important in terms of understanding American innovation and our contributions to the world. It's a story that goes beyond just really what Thomas Edison was doing.
Yeah, I like what he says here. I want to share this a second. Bill Gates says, Thomas Edison remains a powerful exemplar of creativity, of perseverance, of optimism. Even more than light bulbs and movie cameras, that may be his greatest legacy. I think that's a really important point. I'm sure when you no doubt have lots of teenagers come there, don't you?
We do. We have people come to the park here in West Orange from all over the world. We have people of all ages. We have lots of school groups come through, and they're all coming. They want to learn about Edison. They're also coming here to get inspired. We also have a lot of modern innovators and entrepreneurs who come here to kind of draw inspiration from the laboratory. So it's an amazing thing. The visitors who come here are what help keep this place alive and make it a great dynamic place to work.
Well, the kids of today are so technologically hardwired. What is it that inspires them when they come there? What do you tell them about Edison that you find resonates with them?
Well, we try to give them an accurate picture of how Edison worked, and remind them that he worked in teams, that he understood the value of having up-to-date innovation. He understood the importance of working hard and persistence, and I think those things resonate with people. Those are values that are still important in terms of helping people achieve success. But I think the thing that strikes people the most is that the laboratory, and this is also part of Edison's legacy, the Edison family, after he died, made an effort to preserve the laboratory as a resource for everybody. When you go into Edison's laboratory, it is almost like Edison has just stepped out for lunch. The library, the machine shop, the chemistry lab, they all appear as they did when Edison worked here. So what I think inspires a lot of people is that they're connecting with a real place, where things actually happened. And the other point about the laboratory is that it gives you a physical sense of how Edison decided to organize the laboratory itself. You can actually learn about his process of invention by looking at where he put the rooms and how he set them up.
I once heard when I was in college years ago that when Edison would take a young potential scientist to lunch, if they salted their food before they tasted it, he wouldn't hire them because he figured that that was not the mark of a good scientist.
Yeah, that story is definitely a good example of Edison's impatience with what he would consider impracticality, and not doing the simplest thing, which would be to taste the food before you seasoned it, and that is very much another side of Edison that that he's regarded as this iconic figure, but he's also very much a real person that was, in many ways, down to earth and simple.
Well, I always think of Edison as bringing a civilization, really. A few years ago, I went through a hurricane, and after the hurricane, we were without power for about 10 days. And I thought of him often. I thought, man, before Edison, we were in the dark ages. That electricity, light, and the harnessing of these things is civilization. It's like McLuhan said that a great many things have happened in the past 100 years, and most of them plug into the wall.
Well, that's true, and it's hard to imagine what life would be like today without all those things.
Well, let's run through all of his inventions, because most people, of course, they know the light bulb, but beyond that, I don't think people are aware of all the other things he did that affect their lives. So he had what else?
Well, do you want to go in order?
Yes.
I don't know. Overall, he has 1,093 U.S. patents.
well, let's do 900 of them. How about that?
Okay. Well, I don't know if I could name all of them.
but the ones that you cover in your book, I think, are the top ones, naturally.
Well, the three big ones that everybody kind of sort of remembers Edison for are the electric light, the phonograph, and the motion picture camera.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go down a little bit further, if you dig a little bit deeper into the Edison story, you'll also learn about the different telegraph systems that he invented early in his career in the 1870s. He also spends a lot of time working on ore milling technology, storage battery, Portland cement.
Mm-hmm.
The last real major research project at the end of his life was a search for a domestic source of natural rubber.
Did he work with Firestone on that?
Well, Firestone and Henry Ford were friends of Edison at that point, and they influenced and supported Edison's work on rubber, and actually helped him form a corporation that supported the research.
Because Ford and Firestone developed a community in the Amazon to try to grow rubber trees that famously fell apart.
It's actually that's true, and it's actually a very important story for understanding America's response to shortages of strategic resources.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the 1920s, most of the world's rubber came from plantations that were controlled by the British and the Dutch, and Firestone and Henry Ford, for reasons related to their businesses, were dependent on rubber, and there was concern in the 1920s that a natural disaster or some political problem or some economic disruption would cut off America's supply of rubber. And that was what motivated Edison to look at the problem and say, okay, we ought to be able to figure out a way of growing a plant that would yield latex for rubber in the United States in case there was an emergency.
Right. So he was just all over the place, and then whatever he was involved in, he was generally successful at.
Not always. There's a mix of success and failure. His ore milling project in the 1890s ultimately does not succeed. There are other ideas that were tried and maybe didn't go anywhere. But Edison's response to failure, I think, is very interesting. He saw failure really as a learning opportunity. Obviously, he wants to succeed wherever he can, but he claimed that failed experiments were valuable because he learned what didn't work as well as what would work.
So we have the famous saying about the light bulb. Tell us the story about the light bulb, because that's probably the best known thing about his that describes his attitude about failure.
Yeah, well, he's certainly not the first inventor to try to invent an incandescent electric light, and actually inventors as early as the 1840s had tried. At Menlo Park in 1879, Edison decided with a considerable amount of confidence that he would tackle a problem, and he felt that he would be successful. The big challenge there was finding a material that could be used as a lamp filament. That would when it was hooked up to an electric current would glow to give off light, but yet not burn off real quickly. And his insight was to put the filament inside a vacuum, which helped considerably. But he still needed to find a filament, and he tried all sorts of different fibrous materials, cardboard, different types of hair. He tried different kinds of metals and all sorts of things, whatever he had available, and that's how he worked. He drew from the natural world, whatever was around him, and ultimately he tried a piece of bamboo, and that was successful. But he claimed, and of course there's no way of proving this, that he tried 10,000 different things that didn't work. But that knowledge that he gained, he didn't really dismiss that as inconsequential. That was very important in terms of helping him understand what was going on inside the electric lamp.
I do remember that story so well from all the way back in my college days, because it always stuck with me when my professor told us that Edison, upon asked how it felt to fail 10,000 times, and he said, well, I didn't fail 10,000 times, I just found 10,000 ways it wouldn't work. And that is the kind of underlying principle of science, kind of trial and error, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it speaks to his willingness to take the long view in invention. He was not. He was willing to take his time to get it right. He was willing to invest his resources, his money, and his staff's time to succeed. He was always nervous about stuff that worked right away, and that was one of the things that he said about the tinfoil phonograph, which did work once they built a model. And he said, I was always nervous about that because it just seemed to work right away. Of course, it took him a long time to turn that tinfoil phonograph into a commercial product.
I like that he almost immediately after seeing that he could record speech, he thought of a telephone answering machine.
Yeah, that was one of a number of ideas that he threw out there. There were ideas for an answering machine. He envisioned talking books.
Oh yes, right away.
Yeah, and talking dolls. Also, advertising signs on the street that kind of talked.
So he was way ahead of his time.
He was, yeah. He was part of, there's a practical aspect of Edison, but there's also, I think to be successful, you also need to be a bit of a visionary. And he definitely has that. And when he has a clear vision of how an invention is going to be marketed, he tends to be better at it than when he doesn't, because that conception, that vision, really defines what you need to do to follow the steps to be successful.
Well, as I read your book, I kept thinking of Stephen Jobs, even though Bill Gates wrote the foreword. I kept thinking of Jobs because of his vision with so many different products and how they could be taken to market. So Edison was like that in that he invented well, but he also was entrepreneurial and understood the markets they were going to go to. Now, the one thing I found weird, though, was that when he invented the phonograph, and he didn't want people playing records at a speed that was greater than the music was intended for, I guess,
Yeah.
He was a bit of a purist.
Well, at that point, this is later in his career. This is in the 1920s, and what's going on here, which is also referenced in the book, and I think an important part of the story, is that society, in broader terms, is deciding which technologies are going to be adopted. It isn't just Edison announcing, "Oh, I've invented the phonograph and everybody's going to use it." There's very much a social process going on. Consumers had their own ideas, especially young phonograph listeners. They wanted to play. They increased the speed of the phonograph records because they wanted music that they could dance to.
Yes.
And Edison didn't like that because he felt that altered the sound of the record in a way that was not appealing. He spent an enormous amount of time experimenting on records that had high quality sound.
Yes.
And so he was afraid that would jeopardize that marketing point. But also, what's going on here is that you have two different groups sort of having different ideas of how that technology was going to be used.
Yes, because Mozart was obviously made to be played at 33 1/3.
Right.
Wait, another thing that you introduced me to in your book that I had no clue about was his early years of entrepreneurship when he was, 12?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he was already working on a train and finding ways of doing things better. I was so impressed with what he was doing at such a young age.
Yeah, you could start to see the elements of his later career, his willingness to work hard, and his ability to kind of create these small businesses, these micro businesses. He worked as a candy butcher and a newspaper seller on the Grand Trunk Railroad between Port Huron, Michigan, and Detroit, Michigan, in the 1850s. And in addition to that, he also had some side businesses selling fruit, vegetables, butter, and ththings like that to people along the railroad.
Now, how long a trip was that? How many miles?
I don't know that offhand, sir. I think it could be done in less than a day because Edison would take the morning train into Detroit, spend a day at the Detroit Public Library, and return on a trip. So he'd be back and forth in a day. The fact that he's spending time in the public library is also another key to his success.
Mm-hmm.
There's this hunger for information.
And then he created a newspaper on the train.
Exactly. Yes, he purchases a second-hand type printing press and some type,
mm-hmm.
and he not for a long time, but for a while prints this newspaper that had local stories. It had gossip. The train timetable. Anything that he could get. Now,
mm-hmm.
it also the newspaper is important because it also shows that Edison understands the power of the media.
Mm-hmm. Well, ultimately, he was perhaps the first inventor to understand, celebrity at some level. He could market himself.
Absolutely, he's a pioneer in branding.
Mm-hmm.
What we would call branding today, it wouldn't have been called that today. In fact,
mm-hmm.
I don't think there would have been any. We have a much better conception of that today than they did 100 years ago. But he's a pioneer in that. He's not the first American celebrity, but he's certainly one of the first business celebrities.
Mm-hmm.
He's really savvy at promoting himself and creating this persona of what I call in the book the Wizard of Menlo Park persona, the iconic figure. That's very important to him because he's trying to project an image of a reliable inventor, somebody who's really capable of delivering what he promises. He needs that perception for investors to feel comfortable investing in his laboratories and his companies. They need to be able to know that Edison is a guy who can deliver. And he's also very good at branding his name, his signature, his face. The reason why we have 60,000 photographs in the archives is because there's a photo studio in the laboratory here where they are turning out these images.
Mm-hmm. And well, you just have a vast collection there to draw from. It must have been somewhat difficult to put a book together where you have to choose a few.
Yeah, that is the challenge when you write about somebody like Thomas Edison, figuring out what not to talk about and what to talk about, and what's important and what's not important. Particularly if a publisher says, "Well, you only have a certain number of pages to work with," and that's why it did take us a while to think about, what part of the story we were going to tell. One of the things that we didn't want to do was to bog down readers with a lot of detail. I point to other books where people can get that, but we wanted to keep the narrative easy and entertaining to read, while at the same time making some serious points about what Edison means and why he's relevant. It was a bit of a challenge.
Well, I think you rose to it nicely, because it's a good general read about Edison, but gives you sufficient depth to appreciate his genius. You also have, throughout the book, besides the great photographs, you have these marvelous little quotations, like he said, "A great invention which facilitates commerce enriches a country just as much as the discovery of gold." And that's gold itself right there.
Right, yeah.
These are beautiful little quotable quotes throughout. I gave it to my son, who's 13, and he loved just browsing. It's kind of like what we used to call the coffee table book. It's beautiful pictures, but it has a lot of good information, so you can just skip around and browse and enjoy and take from it as you wish. So I thank you so much for giving us the time today.
You're welcome.
What have you learned about the book's appeal so far, now that it's been out for a little while?
Well, we're learning a lot. We're gratified that we're reaching new audiences. I mean, there are a lot of people a number of people that are the real Edison fans. I mean, we're familiar with those people because we work with them a lot. But it is gratifying to see that people who may not necessarily know that they're interested in Thomas Edison are starting to look at it, and we're hoping that this sparks an interest in learning not just about Edison, but also learning about the role of technology in American and world history, and helping people understand that how inventions are developed also has a history that's just as important to understand as the other things that you talk about in history. So we're very pleased with the reception, and we hope that this encourages other people to come to West Orange, come visit the other Edison-related historic sites around the country, and maybe to even write their own books and articles about Edison.
Well, Mr. DeGraaf, thank you so much for joining us. I highly recommend this book. It's Edison and the Rise of Innovation. As my mom used to say about books, she said it's a handsome volume. Wonderful pictures and quotations, and this is one that you want to have the physical book. A great Christmas gift. Give it to your kids to inspire them in what they can achieve if they start early and work hard. Or give it to someone who's just a lover of technology, who can appreciate where all the great things we have today came from. So this is Dr. W.F. Strong signing off for Good Books Radio. May all your books be good reads.